Welcome. Welcome to the evening plenary of Critical Resistance Beyond the Prison Industrial Complex. Who are we? We are activists. We are formerly incarcerated people. We are currently incarcerated people. We are students. We are families of incarcerated people. We are young people wondering what our future is going to be like if all they do is build prisons. Who else are we? We are artists. We are cultural workers. Teachers. Who else? Come on, speak to me. Security. Even the revolution needs security. But in fact, what we are here to try to do is to say to the United States and to the world, real security is not locking up more and more people for an expanding reason. That's not what real security is. Real security is knowing that you will have shelter, that you will have food, that you will have beauty in your life, that you have a future, that your family has a future. That's what security is. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. What is the prison industrial complex? And what are we, critical resistance, going to do to get beyond the prison industrial complex? I have a couple of announcements. Then we're going to hear from our distinguished and wonderful panelists tonight. And then we'll have some time for open mics at the floor. There's one in each of the aisles. As I announced earlier, we are being broadcast live thanks to KPFA Radio. Okay, the housekeeping announcements. One, if Erin Roig is here, pardon me if I mispronounced your name. Tammy, who's staying with you, is desperate to hook up with you so she can find out where she's sleeping tonight. And Tammy is somewhere in the back. All right, so Erin, find Tammy. The second thing is, you all have gotten your programs. Can somebody do something about the feedback? You all have gotten your programs. But you will have noticed that today's rooms were not put in the program because we didn't get them until a couple of days ago. Also in the addendum, which you should have picked up at the registration area, we have room changes for tomorrow and for Sunday. So please get an addendum tomorrow morning when you come back to the conference. The third announcement, housekeeping, is there is a fabulous youth addendum, youth program addendum in your conference packet. Pay close attention to it. A lot of young people put a lot of time into putting that program together. But the room numbers are probably not right. So use the addendum, not the youth addendum, to get the right room numbers for the youth programming over the next couple of days. Okay.
So if they ask you to speak, don't do it. I'm telling you.
It's not that bad. Okay. Tonight we have an astonishing lineup of speakers, and we also have a couple of messages that have come in from elected officials who could not be with us tonight. All right. How's that? All right. This is the mic. All right, we have some messages that have come in from elected officials. I'm going to read a very brief portion of Maxine Waters' statement. She's in Washington, I guess, voting on high crimes and misdemeanors. This is the statement of Representative Maxine Waters for Critical Resistance Beyond the Prison Industrial Complex. Greetings, she writes. I am sorry I cannot attend this important gathering tonight. Unfortunately, I must remain in Washington to cast crucial votes in the House Judiciary Committee. However, The work to improve the lives of our young people who are locked up in the criminal justice system is too important to ignore. I have introduced legislation that would move us away from mandatory minimum sentencing, allow judges the discretion to evaluate cases individually. Think about that. Judges don't have the discretion to evaluate cases individually. Okay. To allow judges the discretion to evaluate cases individually and allow juveniles to be judged as juveniles so that their entire lives are not stolen from them by the prison system. She continues with a number of statistics, many of which you're already familiar with, and goes on to the issue of prison labor. As you know, there have been 20 prisons built in California while only one state university was built. And she adds a University of California campus, but actually it's not built. 8,000 jobs were lost in higher education, while 26,000 jobs were added to the California Department of Corrections. The yearly salary for a prison guard with 6 years of experience is higher than that for a starting tenured professor at the University of California. And actually, I don't think that's so bad. I think everybody should make what professors make. Prison labor refurbishes computers, builds furniture, and builds other light manufactured products. Prisoners receive slave wages, while the California prison industry is protected from federal workplace safety laws, market rates, and bankruptcy. Due to state law, California government agencies are required to buy prison-made goods, which are often poorly made and cost twice as much as they would on the open market. According to the California Budget Committee and the State Department of Corrections data, the state of California bought $150 million in prison goods last year. Under my leadership, that's Maxine Waters' leadership, the Congressional Black Caucus is taking steps to end this exploitation of our youth, many of whom have more need of treatment than they do of punishment. The Congressional Black Caucus took a stand against Barry McCaffrey, the drug czar, when he went against science and convinced Donna Shalala, Secretary of Health and Human Services, to deny support for funding of needle exchange programs. We, the CBC, visited Baltimore, Maryland, and met with recovering addicts and witnessed Baltimore's open-air drug market to draw attention to the nearly 56% of the 27.8 million Americans who need drug treatment who do not receive it. The CBC pushed for and won $200 million for drug court programs for nonviolent offenders with substance abuse problems, and she goes on. In conclusion, I say to you, even though the battle is tough, we cannot give up. The CBC and I will continue to fight for justice and for fairness for all. Thank you for the opportunity to deliver this message. That's from Congresswoman Maxine Waters. For those of you who are perhaps unaware, although Representative Waters is working very hard in some arenas to free people who otherwise are being criminalized, she has not put her voice and her vote behind Assata Shakur, but rather seems to have agreed that Assata should be extradited from Cuba. And that's what this was about. Okay, I have a brief message from Cornel West, and this is the last brief message. This conference, writes Brother West, under the visionary leadership of Sister Angela Davis, is an historic gathering. It puts the misery and suffering of those fellow human beings incarcerated by our unjust criminal justice system at the center of our attention, analysis, and vision. For too long, the prison system has been invisible, even among many progressives. From now on, we shall keep a national limelight on this system in order to fundamentally transform it. Luta continua Cornel West. Now, of course, for many people in this room, the prison system has not been invisible at all. It has not been invisible because people in this room have been in prison, or they have family members and loved ones who are in prison whom they visit regularly, or try to visit, or cannot visit because they're put 900 miles away. There are people in this room who were formerly incarcerated who will be speaking from the front of the room tonight, and other activists, including scholar activists. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce by name each of our presenters tonight. Did the sound just die? Okay. Each of our presenters tonight, and then ask them one by one to come up and give us their presentation. And we have poetry, memoirs, polemic, all of the above for this evening. The presenters include, starting on my right, Luis Bato Talamentez. Bato is a former prisoner. He was a member of the San Quentin Six. He is an activist in California Prison Focus, one of the founders of the Pelican Bay Information Project, and all-around down brother. Angela Y. Davis. Former political prisoner, professor, History of Consciousness, University of California, Santa Cruz. Asha Bandele. Asha is an author, she's a poet, she's a memoirist. She's also activist in the Malcolm X Grassroots organization. Mike Davis. Mike's a concrete kind of guy. He's an author, he's an activist, he's a teacher, he's a former truck driver, he used to cut meat, and he got a MacArthur fellowship nonetheless. Eric Tang, who's in from New York. Eric's an organizer, and he's very active in the Coalition Against Anti-Asian Violence. On top of that, he's the director of the Youth Leadership Project for Vietnamese and Cambodian communities that's located in the Bronx, New York. Jose Lopez. Jose Lopez comes to us from the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, Juan Antonio Corretjer. Did I say it right? I apologize for not practicing. And then is the Vukani Mathwetu choir here or not? One person. And I am Ruthie Gilmore, and I'm happy to be here tonight. So I'd like to ask Bato to open the evening for us. Huh? Tate, who is an activist from Los Angeles. He's the father of Preston Tate, who was murdered by prison guards at Corcoran State Prison 3 years ago. And he's active in California Prison Focus and is taking his case around the country and around the world.
The Marine handlers are praying on a Sunday morning drive, and I can swear to that. A Marin County Sunday drive, and the World Cup is being played on the radio, the highways, not yet woken up to the new world champions. And can I get a ride? And where I've come from within the world of imprisonment, there are no champions that I've seen and that I know, just people that live and die, don't get back up, get back out. And can I get a ride? Sunday is like any other day of the week during the World Cup, during Super Bowl week, County Fair, Marathon, Daytona 500, a Rose Parade. And can I get a ride? And can I get a ride? The struggle for life and death goes on without let up. This we know, we can testify to. Life and death locked out of you. Can I get a ride? And it's a pretty day outside, a cup of sunshine. Can I ride? A wonderful day to know you're alive, alive to the world we know, in a world of playoffs and 60 home run mania. Can I get a ride? And Richard, who's here tonight, my friend, he tells me he just returned from Huntsville. Huntsville. What is Huntsville? Huntsville, where they serve up death weekly. Huntsville, where you live and die, and most likely die. Another prisoner killed by the late, great state of Texas, the state of champions. No trouble getting inside, I'm told, in Texas. I'm told anyone can get in, but can you get out? And can I get a ride? And the prison authorities there, the prison authorities in Texas, they are something. And they want the world to know death comes cheap, once, twice a week, strapped onto a prison gurney, a last fix, and breakfast in bed, a cup of tea. Can I ride? And can I get a ride? And can I get a ride? A fuck damn ride. A ride right now. And can I get a ride? Can I get a ride the fuck out of state for one day? And can I get that ride right now? Tomorrow is Monday. Now why, oh why, am I telling myself tomorrow is Monday? Why? The World Cup is over and things go on as before. We look to other places for other entertainment, other heroes and champions, besides Bill Clinton. But check this out. George Wallace, he died. He died a friend of blacks. But the Pope himself could not save Carla Faye Tucker. And I'm Catholic. I take that as a personal affront. Can I get a ride? Tommy Thompson. Tomorrow at St. Quentin, Tommy Thompson will kiss the world goodbye and be dead. Tommy Thompson. Bless his memory. Tomorrow, Monday, July 14, 1998, and how time flies. Can I get a ride? A fuck damn ride. Another heads on the block at Chewy from where I've come. 6 minutes past midnight. Tommy Thompson. It could be anyone. Death in beautiful Marin, the hills are green. A cup soon runs dry. Can I get a ride? Makes death no less a state criminal enterprise. A damn sorry goodbye business. And death is death in Huntsville, Arkansas. 3 in 1 day for Bill Clinton. Louisiana, Florida, Pennsylvania, Virginia, the Carolinas. Everybody's doing it. Execution by the state killing, death out of you. Can I get a ride? You tell me, can I get a ride? And we just returned from Chowchilla. Chowchilla State Prison. Chowchilla is Chowchilla. The drive was hot. The drive filled with dementia. I had a ride that day. Driving down to go inside this other world where people live out of you, die out of you, get broken down, fall sick, and are forgotten out of you. We went there to witness firsthand the struggle, the actual struggle, the struggle we know nothing about for life and death. Chowchilla. It's served up daily in the lives of women, sisters, mothers, and friends, women who die inside themselves upon awakening each morning to a bitter cup of prison coffee. Can I get a ride? Chowchilla in the San Joaquin Valley, from farm worker days, when we knew it as farm country. But now is where they plant prisons and harvest women, for one thing. And like any prison that I know about, Chowchilla is beyond what we know, beyond comprehension. Can I get a ride on that? Inside the shoe, the Pelican Bay for women. Yeah, Pelican Bay for women. And what is that saying? That we treat men and women prisoners the same? And Chowchilla is Chowchilla. And we are in another dimension of human detention And can I get a ride? 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 Until I run dry. Can I get a ride? Warden Kuykendall once ruled with a set of iron rules. Warden Kuykendall. Before recently being walked off to prison himself for corruption. Now what's new with that? And who are the real criminals? Can I get a ride? We see another reality without seeming comprehension, a place of no pity, mercy, no justice, of state insanity. And can I get a ride? We hear Chachilla, the clanging of doors, iron doors. Our visitors are being brought into us on this day. And we stand in the shadow of doom. We are 3 women from LSPC who I dearly love, and 1 man myself that don't know what he's doing there. But we come to see what the fuck is going on. And can I get a ride? For me, it was returning to a dungeon keep, the one I know well. And I know I can get a ride on that. And we cannot yet see within this gloomy bunker we're in. We are encased in maximum security, a maximum place of concrete and steel, and little hope. Partitions of steel, plexiglass barriers, silence, telephones, and a big question mark that stands all alone by itself. When you leave there wondering. Suddenly, movement, where? We look around. Behind a glass-fronted cubicle with flies splattered on it. But which one? When we look over, we stand, we stare, and we look around in this dungeon keep. Like someone said, over here behind the glass, they're bringing someone in. And we stand there like sheep, the 4 of us, in this dungeon gloom, this gloomy dungeon keep that we know about and never seen it. We look and we see we are stunned to the bone. We are stunned. Into the room, in our left, a scrawny white woman is led in, and she's in a dirty gray smock, and we do not understand what we see. We cannot see her face, and where her head and her face should be is a black hood. A pointed black hood on her head, and we do not know what we are seeing. You understand? Can I get a ride? And I say, what? A fuck down black pointed hood on her head. That's what I say. And we stand frozen, shocked, and this is unreal, surreal, all too real, all at the same time. You understand? And we see, and through my eyes you see, that this is for real. You understand? An everyday horror show, we know nothing about the guards, who we know well. The guards leave her standing in the room, walk out unconcerned, and close the door. They motion her back to the tray spot, the open food court. She stoops. They uncuff her. She stoops. Her hood pulls off, and she turns to look at us, and we see the face of terror. The face of terror staring at us through a fly-swatted glass cubicle. And we know we are not insane. Can I get a ride? They say, whose face did you see? Who did you see? What did you see? I said, I seen terror. Terror staring at me. I seen terror. Then he said, what? I said, I seen terror staring at me. And can I get a ride? And can I get a ride? And can I get a ride?
Can I get a ride? I have been informed that the Vukani Mathwetu choir is here. As a result, because we are being broadcast, we're going to have to compress time a little bit so that we can fit everything into our minutes on the air. So that said, I'll go on to our next presenter tonight, Brother Bill Tate.
Thank you, Cal Berkeley, for having me here. Thank you, Ruth and Ms. Davis. It's a great honor to be here. Someone out there asked for a black face. Well, I'm as black as you get. I am also the angriest man in America. I'm here to tell you about a shot that was heard around the world. April 2nd, 1994, at 8:30 a.m. That morning, I was reading a newspaper and having coffee. It was a typical Saturday. I'm pretty sure you were doing the same thing. But up at the shoe in Corcoran, it was a whole different story. That is the time and date my son was brutally assassinated in the shoe yard. When I got the results about 12 o'clock, I was informed that he was shot and killed by another inmate. And I was baffled. I said, now, how can another inmate get a hold of a weapon? And I just smelled cover-up from the beginning. And about 2 hours later, say 2 o'clock, I got a telegram saying he was killed by one of the guards. they wouldn't go into it. They said that he was the aggressor in a fight. I didn't buy that. So what happened was I got an attorney, Miss Catherine Campbell. She looked into it, and she came up with something that I didn't even know they had going on, a videotape. With the help of the FBI, they went in with a fine-tooth comb. It took them 3 years, 3 long years, but they came out with 8 indictments. Not only that, there was a couple of officers who were tired of seeing the killings going on. Lieutenant Riggs and Officer Caruso. They took information to the FBI, and they were our chief whistleblowers. You know, I'm not soft on crime. I'm not going to sit here and say that Preston was an angel, because he wasn't. He was in jail paying his debt to society, but he wasn't issued the death penalty. But he got it. You know, I'm standing here not just for Preston, but for the other families out there. Don't give up. Don't give up. And with groups like the California Prison Focus, October 22nd group, and all those groups out there, work hand in hand to see that justice is done, because the penal institution is a system run amok. I was lucky to testify at the Senate Committee hearings in August of this year, and it was like a circus. They were pointing fingers at each other. I didn't do it. He didn't do it. I didn't do it. He didn't do it. He said do it. He said do it. And you got to also understand that Pete Wilson and Dan Lundgren, their biggest contributors are the CDs. The CEOs, rather. They got a 12% raise. When's the last time you got one? So, you know, I'm lucky that, I guess you can't say I'm lucky in a way that I will get justice one way or another. Preston's still gone, but I got a feeling he's in here right now. You know, to all the family members out there, just hang in there and hold up all your documentation you have from your loved ones, because it can come in handy. Hang in there. I love you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Prison is not invisible at all. Our next presenter, if she will consent, is Sister Asha Bandele, who will read from her memoir.
In the presence of our ancestors and in the presence of all of you gathered here today, I bear witness as an African woman that just as our beginnings were great and good, so too shall our development throughout history be great and good if we dare to speak truth, do justice, struggle, and walk in a path of righteousness. We say free the land, we say free all political prisoners. Thank you. I know we're pressed for time. I'm going to do this really quickly. I have to acknowledge all the beautiful students who are here from my old school, Hunter College. When we look to organizing, we remember February 1st, 1960. That was students in Greensboro, North Carolina, who set things off. If they set it off then, they can set it off today. It's an honor to be here among you. I also want to acknowledge the members of the organizing committee. I don't know everyone personally. I do know the people who I came in contact with: Robin Templeton, Kamari Clark, Kalima Bell, Angela Davis, Ellen Barry, Rose Brass, and Ruthie, and all the people who have been organizing to bring this conference together. And I think what was less than a year, I only heard about it in November. And I have to say that, you know, we choose to do things solely because it's the right thing to do. That's the only reason we need to, because it's the right place to be. There's no other place to be. On September 25th, 1998, But I also stand here today as a woman who's married to somebody who's doing 20 to life in New York State. And so when you organize for this conference, you organize on my behalf quite personally, and for that I say thank you. I'm going to read two things briefly. An excerpt from a memoir that I just finished writing. Anybody who's written a book, Angela could tell you, other people, it's a hell of an isolating process. You know, you like 300 pages, what? And no one told me they loved me through the whole thing. You just sat in your room and wrote and wrote. So this is called The Prisoner's Wife. It'll be out from Simon & Schuster in May of 1999. That's a little plug. And I usually try to read things that are so full of hope, but tonight, this section, this very small section I'm going to read, was from a more difficult portion. You know, they're just like denying appeals and cutting back ways that people can get appeals, even people on death row. And so this was sort of right in the throes of that. And so you're like, that's where you are in the book. And it begins like this. Have I ever told anyone here how almost every prisoner I've ever known has told me when I asked him that he's coming home in a minute? 1 minute. Not 10 minutes, not 15, but 1 minute. Even the brothers I know who are doing 30 years with life on the back, when you coming home, Pa, I'll ask, I'm going to be home in a minute, baby girl. He's going to say to me and mean it. And I'll look into his face, wet with sincerity, and think, all right. And as though he could read my doubts, the brother would inevitably and with considerable passion add, you gonna see, girl, I'm going to be home in a minute. Have I ever said that my husband Rashid told me he would be home in a minute as well? He said it to me like this over and over. Mommy, he would begin, Mommy, I'm going to get some rhythm in the federal courts. I know the states are a little rough, but in the feds, I'm going to get some rhythm. Have I said that Rashid can argue the law, argue it like he's a seasoned attorney, maybe even better because it's his own life he's fighting for, and how Rashid can write a brief you would never guess wasn't written by a lawyer, which is why I couldn't fight him when he said he was going to win his appeal. The law was his territory. Rashid used to say that. He would say it and back it up by quoting cases and precedents. And okay, I'd agree. I agreed because I had faith. I wouldn't have been in that prison for a single second if I didn't have faith in my husband. I took his hand in my hand. I looked at him directly and I said, all right, you win. I believe you. I gave in to his arguments. Have I said that? I gave in of my own free will. I gave in, and all the while knew I was ignoring the voices inside myself that warned me to keep my defenses up, the voices that admonished me to balance faith with reality. I ignored them at every turn. I listened to my husband and I became a believer. I did that. I did that. Have I ever said how often someone will look at me all flushed with concern, place their hand on my shoulder, wrinkle their brow, and ask in a whisper, so Asha, when is Rashid coming home anyway? How much longer do you all have to go? Oh, he's coming home in a minute, I say to them. He's going to be home in just 1 minute, I say. And then I disappear inside myself. I disappear inside my prayers. I concentrate. I meditate. I summon up faith for 100 women, maybe even more. And I begin to pray, but I don't pray to just any God. I pray to every God I've ever heard of. I call out whatever name... I call out whatever name and whatever manner of worship. I am loud and I speak in tongues. I am soft and I whisper just below my breath. I sob and I am stoic. But no matter how I go to meet God, two things never change. Every time I go, I always go begging, and I go ready to deal like this sweet Jesus, Mary, Joseph, Peter, Paul, Allah, Jah, Yamaya, Ra, Obatla, Booty, Kali, my oh great spirit, you whose name cannot be known or spoken. Look, can you see me, arms out, reaching into the four winds? Jesus, I am here, genuflecting at the altar, swallowing bread and wine. Allah, I'm facing the Kaaba on my knees, my forehead to the ground. Can you see me, oh Batala? Oh my God. Alegba, I'm standing at the crossroads in need of direction, a signpost, a tiny clue, tear a piece off a map. Where am I? Am I close? Am I far? Am I hot? Am I cold? Can you see me? Who can see me? Can you hear me? Who can hear me? Who's willing to come bargain with the prisoner's wife? Have I said... said that when a heart breaks in prison, it's like a building caught on fire in the center of the city. When it crashes onto that visiting room floor, it's like the screams coming from that building, the screams trying to reach up high above sirens and hoses gushing water and firemen's boots breaking the cement and fire biting through the night. And when I think of this happening, I wonder this one thing. Would I hear those people screaming inside a burning building? I always suspect I might not, because their screams would be so expected I wouldn't even notice them. There was a time I can still remember when I could be horrified. I remember when a company of shackled men passing beside me could slap me, knock me to the ground. That time is gone now. That image no longer spins an ancient and brutal blood memory of slavery, uncontrollable and terrifying inside my head. It no longer makes me sit, gather back my breath. When I think of fire and people screaming, I think of the prison and people shackled, and it occurs to me, if my sight has been neutralized, has my hearing been as well? A heart that breaks in prison is a scream that tries to force itself out of a building that is burning. It's a scream that gets vanished into a mean orchestra of screams. The scream is gone, as though it had never once been there. My scream is gone, and that woman's scream is gone, and so is hers, and so is hers, and so is his, and so is his. Our screams are ashes and soot left behind, waiting to be rinsed or blown away forever. And prison is a fire that can always seem to roar the loudest and spread the furthest, swallow the most, and spare the least. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is the last one. I just want to say this. Are we time? Oh, okay. Oh, we get water. Heavy on. Good. So you won't see like white or, Okay, we have 1 minute left. So instead of reading another poem, let me say this. Since Maxine Waters is not here, no, the poem is 2 minutes, and I'd rather speak about Assata Shakur and the need for COINTELPRO hearings. Right? I'll get my opportunity to read more poetry to you tomorrow. I may not have another opportunity to say that we need to demand that the Congressional Black Caucus, whose salaries we pay, must begin counterintelligence hearings right now. And if that's the minute I have, that's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Prison is never invisible. The next person we'll hear from tonight is Brother Eric Tang, the organizer. Brother Tang.
Can't believe they're going to make me follow Asha. She really takes you someplace, huh? Okay, before I begin, I think I need to thank a couple of people. My deepest appreciation to Dylan Rodriguez for inviting me out here. To Mercy Romero and Perla Zialcita for their hospitality. And finally, a shout out to all the Asian Pacifics out here tonight. Out in full force, I should say. Asian American activists have a rich history in the struggle to free political prisoners, from Reverend Mike Yasutaku to Yuri Kochiyama, so let me just shout out a couple of folks. The crew from API Force out here in the Bay Area, Scott's crew from LA, Bob Wing, and of course my fellow travelers from the East, Burt Wong, Fred Ho, John Kim and the crew from CUNY, Tony Wynn, and Wayne Lum. Okay, this paper is dedicated to Young Xing Wang, a 16-year-old son of a garment worker in Chinatown, murdered by the NYPD, March 1994. Yesterday I was lucky enough to spend the morning with a comrade of mine from New York, Wayne Lum. Wayne is a central force in the David Wang Support Committee, a group that for several years has been waging a relentless battle to free David Wang, a Chinese immigrant who was framed for a murder for which there exists overwhelming evidence he didn't commit. Railroaded through a trial which did not provide him translation in his language, and he now serves a 25-year to life sentence in Auburn, New York, a town where virtually every one of its white residents is somehow employed by the prison industrial complex. Now, having worked with the David Wang Support Committee in the past, and also from just being around Wayne and having the opportunity to hear him, and he who to this day continues to speak passionately and brilliantly about David's case, I thought I knew quite well the issues that his case exposes: the plight of the undocumented immigrant, the deep racism and brutality of the criminal justice system against poor immigrants. But listening to Wayne speak yesterday, some new thoughts about David crept into my head. I started asking some questions about him in the broader context of poor and working people in our cities who are thrown into a lifelong struggle against the state and its violent practices. Who is this man sitting in his prison cell, and how does he continue to relate to the poor Chinese immigrant sweatshop worker, a workforce that he would have belonged to if he were not imprisoned? How does he, David, who now labors in the prison industrial complex, continue to relate to that super exploited Chinatown workforce? And from there I start to ask some bigger questions, some far-reaching questions. How does he relate to the black and Puerto Rican youth of New York City, the unemployed youth segments of our city, those who are tracked for incarceration, those whose neighborhoods have become virtual prisons? And anyone who was at the Million Youth March in Harlem can attest to this. Before long, I realized that my questions were really addressing the dual character of our cities. We have what's called the dual city, characterized by the sharp polarization between the predominantly white, yet certainly multicultural, professional and middle classes on the one hand, and the concentration of the hardcore black urban poor on the other, known to many as by a dehumanizing phrase called the underclass. Yet there is another duality, that of the dual migration, characterized by the sharp polarization between a migrating class of Asian professionals and transnational elites on the one end, and the massive wave of poor Asian laborers on the other. My question tonight is, how do these two bottom halves meet up, so to speak? The black urban poor that contends with joblessness and the collapse of the welfare state, and the third world immigrant who lives in a constant state of working poverty as he or she serves the global economy from a sweatshop in Chinatown. And how does our understanding of the character, practice, and motives of state violence in our respective communities provide a way of drawing out that important connection? These questions form the basis of what I want to talk about tonight, and indeed how I understand my presence at this conference. Now tonight I'm going to talk about state violence in Asian communities, but touching only briefly on the growing Asian prison population. Part of the reason is because the organization which I represent, the Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence, does not run an Asian prison program. While we certainly work with and advocate for Southeast Asian and Chinese youth or Korean immigrant women workers who are presently or previously incarcerated, most of this is done on an individual basis and not through a systemic program. But the more compelling reason is that I want to focus on state violence within Asian communities, in our neighborhoods, workplaces, and social spaces. My intention is to expose Asian communities as a virtual arena for a wide range of violent state practices, and to make the connection between these arenas and what we are here calling the prison industrial complex. If our movement against the prison industrial complex and state violence is to be successful, we need to talk honestly about the nature of state violence in our communities and develop unity, having recognized those distinctions. In other words, it's not enough simply to cite the growing Asian prison population, for that only tells us part of the story. And don't get me wrong, it's a very important piece of the story. Some of us are desperately trying to put together the data this weekend, and if you have any, fork it over. But tonight, I want to lay some modest groundwork for the larger context of state violence in our communities. And in the process, I hope to promote anti-state violence work as one of many paths that Asian American activists can take in the struggle to rebuild the radical movements in our communities. Okay. As we approach the 21st century, capitalism has only accelerated its drive towards an unjust and inhumane social order for this nation. Without missing a beat, the state has developed sophisticated measures to serve capitalist interests and to discipline the non-white working class. Indeed, the state serves as an economic regulator by actively seeking the incarceration of a reserve labor force comprised predominantly of black youth, by issuing city and state ordinances that literally remove the poorer people of color from public spaces, and by using workfare programs to convert welfare recipients into slave laborers at previously unionized jobs. These state practices uphold the needs of a new global assembly line. Just as neo-imperialism has recruited a pool of highly exploitable labor in the third world for U.S. capital, the U.S. prison industrial complex has allowed U.S.-based industries to become third-worlded by relocating manufacturing jobs inside of prisons and by initiating workfare programs. Throughout the nation, inmates, the vast majority people of color, are forced to work as producers for multinational corporations. Here, of course, the economic role of the state is disguised as a crime-fighting effort. The state isn't doing this to advance capitalist interests, but to stop violent crime and welfare fraud. And every day this crime-fighting charade is played out in the public eye. From the videotaped beating of Rodney King to the hit television series Cops, state violence is the primary mode through which images of the black working class are circulated and received these days. The black working class has become a public spectacle for crime and punishment. At the same time, however, contemporary capitalism has made a point of disguising state violence against Asian immigrant communities. The recent wave of Asian immigrant laborers to the United States is fueled by the same global economic interests that drive the prison industries. The need for highly exploitable or informal labor, which keeps the U.S. manufacturing competitive with the third world. To be sure, the new immigrant enclaves of our city function as a virtual third world within, spaces where immigrant workers are forced to labor in sweatshop firms or in low-wage service economies which cater to the needs of the urban professional class. Keeping this immigrant labor force confined and disciplined requires its own set of violent state practices, police raids of immigrant economies, the literal removal of immigrants from particular areas of the city, the brutalization and imprisonment of those who transgress the boundaries of the immigrant enclave. These are just a few of the many forms of state violence that pervade working-class Asian immigrant communities in New York City. And those who fail to conform to that violent state regime are imprisoned, or those who get caught on their way to the enclave are imprisoned, such as the Golden Venture brothers, who were imprisoned for several years after their ship docked on the beaches of Rockaway. Yet these acts of state violence, unlike those which target black urban communities, cannot be explained away by the master narrative of crime prevention, save for particular youth segments, which I'll talk about a little later. To do so would only subtract from the state's conscious efforts to make the color of crime and state violence decidedly black. What then is the appropriate moral panic or social crisis that can be used to justify state violence against the Asian immigrant communities? How does the state publicly explain its daily harassment of low-wage Asian workers, vendors, small entrepreneurs, and poor neighborhood residents who live on the borderlands of white residential areas? The answer is quite simple: it doesn't. State violence against Asian immigrants remains a covert operation, removed from the public spectacle, much like organized crime. Much like organized crime, state violence hooks up with business owners, uses physical coercion and extortion. Add to this a number of vague city ordinances and zoning laws, and we have a veritable arena of state violence in Asian communities. Now I'm going to skip through a couple of things here. I was going to talk about the Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence and what it does, but my time is up. I just want to briefly go into a couple of things. In 1990, CAV's mission is to expose and publicly broadcast state violence in Asian communities, recognizing that the role that it plays within these communities is precisely the role that the prison industrial complex plays for broader economic interests. In 1994, during the height of the Giuliani regime, we issued a committee known as the Racial Justice Committee in order to monitor systemic patterns of police abuse and organize community residents to fight for precinct-level reforms and criminal indictments of abusive police officers. If you've ever been to Chinatown, you realize that the police play a very particular economic role in regulating the economy. From vendors to taxi drivers to small shop owners, they basically extort from community members in order to extract money and advance the capitalist interest of the city. Not only that, they police the area to make sure that Chinatown doesn't grow beyond its borders in order to maintain an exploitable workforce. Okay. And meanwhile, its young people are targeted every day. I just mentioned young Shen Wang, a 16-year-old youth who was shot in the back of the head by a police officer for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ask me more about that as I do the Q&A. My apologies. I want to just say a couple of things real quick to wrap up. I don't even have the opportunity to talk about the Southeast Asian Youth Leadership Project, which I run, but we'll talk about that during the Q&A. One thing I want to say is that we, as Asian American activists, we can't afford to look at state violence and the prison industrial complex as an exception for our communities. Too often, when I talk about what goes on in the Southeast Asian community, rattling off a list that includes police brutality, incarceration, unemployment, I often receive comments about how exceptional these issues are. On the one hand, this may be true. A quick glance at the stats will tell you that Black and Latino youth are the most frequent targets of incarceration and police abuse. But on the other hand, if we insist that the color of state violence is unequivocally black, then we run the risk of naturalizing notions of black criminality, black pathology. In effect, we reinforce the idea of the black underclass. Indeed, this matter has little to do with whether or not Southeast Asians pose an exception. Rather, it has to do with the ways in which we as progressives and radicals and revolutionaries have also internalized assumptions about the character of black struggle. Okay, this might seem a subtle point, but I think it's an important one for Asian activists to consider. All right. In closing, I just want to relate some history told to me by Dave Kakashibe of the East Bay Asian Youth Center. According to Dave, an eruption of Southeast Asian gang violence in East Oakland during the mid-1980s prompted the Oakland police to take some affirmative action. With a head nod from the Asian community establishment, the Oakland police, in militarized fashion, swept through the Southeast Asian community, staging frame-ups and issuing false arrests, trumped-up charges, etc. Okay, these tactics were used against these youth. The tactics used against these youth were a replica of the tactics used against the Black Panther Party in Oakland during the mid-1970s. In fact, they were often carried out by the same exact men. Before retiring from a lifetime of law enforcement, it seems as if these police officials decided to take their final victory lap by exterminating Oakland's new Southeast Asian peril. But this war against Southeast Asian youth was not so much a final chapter as it was a chance to come full circle. You see, the counterinsurgency tactics deployed against the urban guerrilla war of the Panthers were adaptations of the counterinsurgency tactics used by the U.S. military in the Third World, particularly Vietnam. Here we are presented with a mind-numbing turn of events. The violence used to destroy Southeast Asians abroad are recalibrated to destroy the Black Third World within, which in turn opened up the door for destroying America's new urban dwellers. Ironically, the children of the war for which they were originally designed. Almost 30 years ago, Black, Chicano, and Asian youth took on the collective title Third World People. Unfortunately, the state took the analogy one step further by deploying a common militarized agenda against both the Third World and the Black Third World within. Today, however, these two spheres are no longer fully separated by oceans and continents. The masses in the Third World masses and the Black and Chicano working class now meet on the streets of America's cities. In an age when collective community struggle and the promise of a different society seem to have vanished for many, this new racial reality furnishes us with exciting possibilities. But making the most of these possibilities requires that we see no issue, struggle as misplaced, out of range, or exceptional. Thank you.
Did you hear that? All right. I want to send out a shout to everybody who was deflected from this room and is in the spillover rooms listening tonight. We're really glad you're here, and we're glad everybody out in KPFA world is there as well. We have a timekeeper sitting down here in the front. Identify yourself to the remaining panelists, please. Good. Okay, we've got to be tight on the time because we do have the youth choir coming down and we do want to have a little time for Q&A. So, without further ado, let's hear from Mike Davis.
I'll be very brief. Our brother Daniel Leander's release date, the year 2024, for organizing the largest inmate insurrection in the modern history of Arizona, has asked me to convey to you his love and best wishes for this conference. I brought a piece of my driveway along. The Romans claimed to have invented concrete, plaster of Paris, and gravel. And when I was a child growing up in California in the 1950s, this is what the California dream was made out of. This is the substance of it. You know, great dams, new highways, schools, hospitals everywhere. And for a lot of Californians, and not all, unionized good jobs. Now I look at concrete and it seems like something rather sinister. There's too much of the stink of claustrophobia and human oppression and slavery about it. And you can't go anywhere in California these days, in rural California, in the deserts, the cotton fields, or even in the redwoods, without seeing the gray prison walls looming up on the horizon. And they really look like warehouses. And when I was doing a story for The Nation magazine at Calipatria Prison in Imperial County, one of the administrators turned to me and said, "Yeah, warehouses." He says, "What we actually are," and he said it with a sneer, "we're human landfills." To appreciate the real inhumanity and brutality of what's been done in California, you have to read the literature of what's called the new penology. Yeah, this is the theoretical literature that lays behind the construction of vast prison systems. And what you find is penologists don't talk anymore about rehabilitation, but they also don't talk about punishment anymore. The key word is immobilizing the strategic age cohorts. In other words, warehousing Americans whose ancestors for 400 years, labored to build this country in the cotton fields and the factories, but because their labor is no longer necessary to the economy, we warehouse them instead. Although the cost of this warehousing is the price of that California I grew up in, because it doesn't exist anymore. Each of those prisons is a school or a hospital that will never be built. And this California Gulag archipelago is more of a direct threat, an immediate danger, more of a hazard to the health of people of California than the San Andreas Fault. Now, no society since Nazi Germany has built so many prisons in such a short period of time. Upton Sinclair, the great California radical and socialist author, once said in the 1930s, he says, if fascism ever comes to the United States, it'll come in California first. We need to ask the question, who's responsible for this? The easiest answer is to say Pete Wilson, Dan Lundgren, Duke Majan. But I'm afraid the real answer is a little more complicated, because this Gulag archipelago is simply the greatest bipartisan public works program of the last generation. It was built by spineless Democrats as much as it was built by malicious Republicans. It was built by Willie Brown, not having the courage of his convictions that 3 strikes was an utter disaster for California, not lifting a finger to oppose it. According to a study that Rand did a few years ago, in a single 10-year period, the California legislature passed over 1,000 individual acts of legislation, either creating new penalties or stiffening penalties that already exist. And this is simply without precedent in the history of the United States. So let me end by just saying, what do you do when you have these great concrete walls? How do you knock a concrete wall down? Well, the answer is you need a hammer, and you're the hammer. Thank you.
Hammer. Hammer time. We've come a long way since we gathered here this evening at about 6:07 p.m. We've been inside the prisons, outside the prisons. We've been the families. We've been the activists. We've been the friends. We've seen the concrete wall. And Eric Tang reminds us we have to think globally if we want to understand what's going on with prisons here in California and around the United States. And we not only have to think about the global economy as it's expanding, but we also have to think about colonialism and what that means to this day. Jose Lopez.
¡Que viva Puerto Rico libre! Before I begin, because obviously we do have a very tight time element here, I want to acknowledge the presence of one of Puerto Rico's greatest living heroes, a man who spent a quarter of a century in prison, Rafael Cancel Miranda. By the way, those of you who may doubt the idea that the simplest form of struggle can sometimes have incredible significance, all you have to do is study what many of us have done in the Puerto Rican independence movement in terms of the Puerto Rican political prisoners. And when we see that Rafael Cancel Miranda and the nationalists of the 50s were put away in the case of Oscar Collazo for life, and that the U.S. government was forced ultimately to let them free unconditionally. It definitely says to us that whatever we do, and sometimes the smallest things. Today, we were talking to Rafael about the letters that young people in our school began to write to him in 1971 and 72. And that out of those letters came an entire movement to free the Puerto Rican nationalists that ended in their release, unconditional release, in 1979. So I want to say to you here gathered today that it is important to keep the struggle in whatever forms alive and to be consistent and to be resilient. "22 years ago, I was called before a grand jury, as were called many other Puerto Ricans have been called over the years to testify. And we refused, and I went to prison. And I spent 8 months in prison. And today, 22 years later, the FBI and the U.S. Attorney in Chicago have convened 2 grand juries to try to put us away again. And obviously, to us, this is comes with the territory. so we are not afraid. But what is incredible is that a grand jury has been convened to investigate the work of a community that decided to turn an inner city high school, Clemente High School, into a model academy, and was willing to put resources to prevent it from becoming an antechamber to the prisons, because that's what most of the inner city high schools in the United States are. They are about preparing our youth for prison. And I want to read to you a little excerpt from the Chicago Sun-Times about this investigation. And it says Miller, who is the special counsel who has done an investigation through the state legislature that has lasted a year and a half with 6 full-time state police, he says that the FBI has now given them a subpoena to turn over their findings. Miller said state police found categorically that the Puerto Rican independence movement infiltrated Clemente's local school council and used between 500,000, before it was $1 million, now they put it 500,000, to $1 million of Chapter 1 funds from 1992 to 96 to subsidize political activities geared to the release of 15 convicted Puerto Rican terrorists in U.S. prisons. The money was used to hire dozens of artists and two curriculum consultants, and to pay for cultural immersion student trips and stipend to 700 parents. This is what this grand jury is about, and that's what they hope to put people in jail for. But I want to say something. I had something a little bit more formal, but I want to suggest to you something very important for you to think about. And that is that today, this year, it is the 30th anniversary of the issuance of the Kerner Commission report. And that report is extremely important because that report was the product of the commission that was convened by President Johnson to study the causes of urban uprisings in the 60s. And out of that report comes a two-pronged strategy. A strategy aimed that to me is clearly a counterinsurgency, and let me underline it, counterinsurgency operation modeled after that which was developed and has been developing in England through the writings, particularly of two military experts, Colonel Kitson and Everley, used against the Irish movement. And this is primarily aimed at preventing what they consider is a state of permanent insurgency. What they concluded was that in the 60s, you had developed in the inner cities of America a state of permanent insurgency. And therefore, the state had to respond with a policy, a strategy of permanent repression. And so, when we look at America's prisons, and when we look at America's cities, let me suggest to you that what we're looking at is that in terms of America's cities, we are looking at Bantustans. And why do I say that? In 1948, the South African government developed the apartheid system, and in its constitution created Bantustans, actually states for the black people. But they were not just states for black people. These were pockets, islands, isolated from each other. In a sea of whiteness, islands of blackness. And the idea was to be able to contain the black population of South Africa. That's what the Bantustans were about. And I'm suggesting to you that if you study population patterns in U.S. cities, I don't care what city you take, you will see the same phenomena. And it is the phenomena that the Kerner Commission concluded was America's cities are unlike any other city in the world. And that meant America's cities are cities that basically, after the suburban explosion, that the white people went to the suburbs and the cities were left primarily for people of color, that trend created a very serious situation in the 60s because it provided a space in which the ghetto became the academy for black people, for Puerto Ricans, for Mexicans to engage themselves in a process of political dialogue and political action. Think about Malcolm, you have to think about Malcolm standing in the corners of Harlem and not in some university engaging students in intellectual dialogue. What we have is that report concluded that trend had to be changed. They give me 1 minute, and I'm sorry, but the trend had to be changed, and the idea was that you would take the people of color, the population of the inner city, and actually put them outside of the city and bring back into the city the white population. But you were not just taking people of color to any part, you were taking them to areas that were totally isolated, unimportant, where they would have, in Chicago, for example, the southwestern suburbs, Harvey, Midlothian, that area there is a black belt, but it has no political power, has no economic power, and that's the pattern across the United States. And I am going to say that if America's cities are becoming America's Bantustans, then America's prisons are becoming America's concentration camps. And there is no doubt that when you look at America's prisons and you look at the fact that there are 1.5 million people in America's prisons, and 65 to 70% are people of color and young people of color. And when you look on the other side and you see this bell curve, and there are 1.5 million people in higher education, but 80% are white, there's something really wrong. And Fior, just 1 second. Dostoevsky, in his book Crime and Punishment, suggests to us that if you want to understand the quality of life of a society, look inside its prison. Look inside its prisons. Look inside America's prisons, and you will see America's internal colonies. You will see the U.S. empire at work. I want to end with a brief quote, and just for you to think about. Sometimes the largest battles are fought in the smallest battlefields. Sometimes small actions act like sparks, igniting mass movements. Sometimes within a seemingly small, isolated issue, we find a microcosm of the fundamental battles of our day. And sometimes, as with Achilles, that unprotected spot on an otherwise invulnerable enemy turns up in the most unexpected place.
Are we the hammer? All right. Our last speaker needs no introduction, so I won't introduce Angela Y. Davis.
Good evening. Can you believe it? Yeah, it's about time. It's about time. You know, first I'd like to join Ruthie Gilmore in welcoming all of you on behalf of the Critical Resistance Organizing Committee. Both of us are members of the committee, and as a matter of fact, this may be a good time to ask all of the other members of the Critical Resistance Organizing Committee to stand. This gathering has been a long time coming. And some of us got together and decided about a year ago that we had to try to put it together. And of course, many of you who are here this weekend have been working with the most incredible determination over years and over decades. I am humble in the presence of Rafael Cancel Miranda. Thank you. There are former political prisoners present here this weekend. There are former prisoners present this weekend. There are advocates of prisoners' rights. There are activists. There are lawyers. There are scholars. There are cultural workers who oppose state repression. And I don't know, but this may very well be the first time that so many of us have gathered together to figure out how to organize a national, sustained anti-prison campaign. Anti-prison campaign. And I say national anti-prison campaign, but this campaign also has international dimensions because people are here from the UK, from the Netherlands, from South Africa, from Canada, from Australia, and from anywhere else. South America. Puerto Rico. We opened the conference this afternoon with a panel of former and current prisoners who, of course, must play a pivotal role in formulating this campaign strategy. And I'd like to particularly welcome Geronimo Jijaga Pratt, who will be speaking on Sunday. Opportunity to hear from him on Sunday. But I also want to I'd like to evoke the name of the late George Jackson. Who almost 3 decades ago helped us to begin to conceptualize the kind of anti-prison movement that has become so necessary today. I'd also like to evoke the name of Rochelle McGee, who was my co-defendant and who is still in prison, and of Assata Shakur, and of Mumia Abu Jamal, and of Leonard Peltier, and of women like Kathy Boudin, and like Dulcia Pagan, and Laura Whitehorn, and Linda Evans, and Alicia Rodriguez, and Luz Rodriguez, and Carmen Valentin, and Alejandrina Torres. One of the most exciting aspects of this gathering this weekend is that women and men who are currently behind bars are actually participating in this gathering. There are several panels of prisoners that will be teleconferenced in to us. There are prisoner call-ins. And In formulating the possibility of a powerful anti-prison movement, we take into consideration that so many prison reform movements in the past, as important as they may have appeared to be, have had the effect of strengthening and rendering more powerful the prison system. And so therefore, we want to talk this weekend about radical strategies. Strategies that help our sisters and brothers who are inside, that help to alleviate the misery and the pain, and at the same time move toward the abolition of prisons as the only attempt to solve the major social problems of our time. We began to think about this conference perhaps a year and 3 or 4 months ago. And we decided to use the concept of the prison industrial complex as our organizing principle. Dorsey Nunn, whom many of you heard this afternoon as the moderator of the opening panel, who's a member of our organizing committee, kept telling us that nobody knew what this meant. You know, what does the prison industrial complex mean? Give me a definition, he kept saying, so that people know what I'm supposed to be talking about. So, you know, some of us said, well, we began to use this term after we read Mike Davis's article about Calipatria in The Nation some years ago, because he was talking about the development of a prison industrial complex here in the state of California. So some of us tried to come up with a tentative definition, and I want to refer to some of the points that we made in attempting to develop this definition. First of all, the prison industrial complex is a term that refers to the exponential expansion of prisons and jails and the rising numbers of men and women prisoners from communities of color. And second, the increasingly symbiotic relationship between private corporations and the prison industry.
Thank you.
Which means that private corporations literally feed the punishment industry, and that the punishment industry yields enormous profits for private corporations. And not just private prison corporations, not just the Corrections Corporation of America, not just Wackenhut, but TWA, right, and IBM as well. Number 3, the reliance of many communities upon what is so euphemistically called corrections for economic vitality, particularly in the aftermath of corporate migration to the third world. So you see the connection that Eric Tang was talking about, and the connection that Jose Lopez was talking about. And fourth, we see a mounting political influence of the correctional community. As a matter of fact, the correctional officers in California are the most powerful lobbying force, the most powerful political force in the state. Thank you. And of course, number 5, the collaboration of politicians and the dominant media in the wholesale criminalization of communities of color, and particularly youth of color, and in the representation of prisons as a catch-all solution to social problems. Now, I'm sure there'll be many long discussions about the prison industrial complex this weekend, including how to formulate some simpler definitions, perhaps, and how to popularize the meaning of the prison industrial complex, and how to render it a term that we use in our everyday vocabulary. how to discuss the relationship between the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex. Well, anyway, what I should say is that since we began organizing this conference a little over a year ago, the term prison industrial complex has acquired a currency that it did not have a year ago. And our goal is to encourage people to make this a part of our everyday vocabulary and to think and act critically in relation to the proliferating prison system that threatens to devour all of our social resources while it produces enormous profits for private corporations. Over the last couple of decades, prison spending has jumped from $2.3 billion to $31.2 billion. The prison industry generates an estimated $40 billion a year for Chevron, for TWA, for Victoria's Secret, for American Express, for General Electric, and of course for Corrections Corporation of America. Over a century ago, before this vast buildup began in the punishment industry, the press asked a labor leader by the name of Samuel Gompers what labor wanted. And what did he say? He said, "We want more schoolhouses and less jails." He said, "We want more books and less arsenals, more learning and less vice, more constant work and less crime, more leisure and less greed, more justice and less revenge." As you can see from the program, there are scores and scores of panels and workshops and roundtables. This is a working conference. This is a working conference, a strategy session, and our goal is to engage people in conversation, to bring people together who might otherwise not have had the opportunity to talk to each other. Some activists have said that this conference is too academic. Yeah. And then some academics have said, well, this isn't an academic conference, this is an activist conference. There are academics and there are activists. But we say that it is neither. It is neither an academic conference nor an activist conference, because we need to move beyond this either-or conception. Right? Because there are academics who are activists, and there are activists who are academics or independent scholars or researchers. There are students who don't want to have to choose one way of identifying themselves. And there are advocates, there are lawyers and social workers and teachers, and there are artists, there are filmmakers, there are musicians, there are poets, there are graffiti artists, there are photographers. Visit the exhibition in the Worth Ryder Gallery, attend the cultural events, the film festival, the lunchtime cultural performances, the Underground Railroad show tonight, and the show here on campus tomorrow night. And actually, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the musicians who participated in a critical resistance benefit concert last Saturday: John Trudell, Michael Franti, Michelle Ndege-Ocello, and Ani DeFranco. This weekend, all of us will learn a great deal. No matter how much we feel we can teach, we can learn even more. Those of us who are older need to learn from younger people. And youth have played a major role in organizing and inspiring the campaigns that will be launched this weekend, and organizing this conference and taking us beyond this weekend. As a matter of fact, the high school students who in Olean, who have called a walkout next week, a walkout of all high schools in the Bay Area in connection with this critical resistance campaign. All of us, young and old, should salute the courageous youth who are leading the way, So Attend panels and workshops on topics that are not as familiar to you as others might be. Engage in conversation with people you would not ordinarily talk to. Move beyond the boundaries that ordinarily define your lives and your work. Rather than complain that academics often talk in a language that is not always accessible to non-academics, urge them to think deeply about new vocabularies. And remember that activists often have their own languages as well that are not always transparent to people who are involved in our movements and campaigns. I sometimes still sign my name in struggle, and some people ask me, what does that mean? You know? They think I'm referring to something that happened in the 60s. Anyway, I think you get the drift. I'd like to give you a couple of apologies. I'd like to apologize on behalf of the organizing committee for all of our shortcomings. And Christos reminded us that Eddie Hatcher's name is not on the program. I'd like to apologize to everyone whose name doesn't appear in the program. And you have to realize that when the 25 of us on the committee began to put this conference together over a year ago, we had no idea that we were organizing something so massive. You know, as we said in the welcoming letter, we were hoping we could find 500 people to come to the conference. And so we have had to raise all of the money for this event. We still haven't raised all of it. So we're asking you to help us. Buy the T-shirts. There's a wonderful silk screen of Rupert Garcia's image that we've used as the logo of this campaign. Please help us, and I'm sure we'll be passing. As a matter of fact, we should have some buckets to pass around this evening. My broken leg is one of the many disasters of the organizing campaign. I was moving a little bit too rapidly, trying to get work done, and broke my leg. So excuse us for all of the problems. We're not trained conference organizers. We didn't have a staff. And we just had courage and determination and the desire to bring all of you together. So I know I'm over time, but I'd like to return just very briefly to the theme of the campaign. In all of the panels, workshops, and roundtables, please think about proposals for campaign strategies. Sunday is the day that we're devoting to developing the initial infrastructure of the campaign. So please attend the short task force meetings on Sunday in order to be a part of the regional networks that we want to create. This is how you will become a part of these networks and this infrastructure. And so finally, let me say that we are living in a historic moment in which we face a choice. Either the prison industrial complex will become our basic way of life, the criminal standard of justice for the new global order, or we will abolish it altogether, or we will be the hammer that abolishes us. That is the historic work we're here to start or to continue this weekend. To safeguard a democratic future, it is possible and necessary to weave together the many and increasing strands of resistance to the prison industrial complex into a powerful movement for social transformation. Resistance must be critical. We must be critical in our resistance. And this is the critical moment for resistance. Resistance is critical. So welcome to critical resistance and to this great effort to move us beyond the prison industrial complex.
take a deep breath, and we're going to have a moment of beauty to guide us in our struggle tonight.
We did say 2 rows. Okay. Just go.
Check. Still checking. Still checking.
As a matter of fact,
Check it out.
curve around.
Check.
Vukani!
Check. There we go.
Thank you. Testing. Way to. All right. Power to the people. Power to the people. All right. Yes. Ready?
Mandela, Mandela.
Mandela says fight for freedom. Mandela says freedom now.
Away with slavery.
Now we say away with slavery. In our land of Africa. Mandela says fight for freedom. Mandela says freedom now.
Say away with slavery.
Now we say away with slavery. In our land of Africa. Holy clock, clock, Mandela. Freedom is in your hands.
The way to freedom.
Show us the way to freedom. In our land of Africa.
We the people of South Africa declare for all our country and the world to know that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, and that no government can justly claim authority unless it's based on the will of all the people. Let all who love their people and their country now say, as we say here, these freedoms we will fight for side by side throughout our lives until we, all of us, have won our liberty.
Holy clock, clock, freedom is in your hands.
The way to freedom.
Show us the way to freedom. In our land of Africa. la poaya con la somande. Berkeley jele, Berkeley jele, kutuya. Berkeley jele, Berkeley jele, kutuya. Berkeley jele, Berkeley jele, kutuya. Mandela, la poaya con la somande. From Mandela, from Mandela, from Mandela, from Mandela, from Mandela. Yo que yendo con Mandela, from Mandela, from Mandela. La poaya son Mandela, son Mandela, son Mandela, son Mandela, son Mandela, son Mandela. Yo que digo con Mandela, son Mandela, son Mandela. La poaya son Mandela.
Good evening. We are Vukani Mathwetu. In Zulu, that means people arise. We sing the freedom songs of South Africa. We were founded by a South African, James Madalope Phillips, who was living in exile. Our choir was formed in 1986 and actually performed for the first time on this very campus in Zellenbach Auditorium. We've been singing for 12 years. Last year, we had the fortunate opportunity to go to South Africa.
All right.
We brought not only these songs, but we brought freedom songs from the United States. We were greatly received, and it was just really the most marvelous experience we could have ever had. The next song we're going to sing, Zen Zenina, is a song that was frequently sung at the grave site of freedom fighters who were killed during the struggle. Zen Zenina, what have we done? What is our crime? Our only crime is that we are black. We sung this at the grave site of Stephen Biko.
Yes. All right.
join us now. Come join us now. Come join us now. Come join us now. Come join us now. Join us now. Come join us now. Come join us now. Senserino. Let it
So with a heavy heart, I have to bring our evening to a close. We had hoped to have an open mic for some discussion, but alas, our time is up. However, we do have the entire weekend ahead of us. I know that there was at least one group of people who have come up from Australia who wanted to speak tonight. I hope they will have another opportunity during the weekend. Another sister was in from Baltimore. I want to announce to you the protest march and theater spectacle to oppose the new Berkeley jail. The march is Sunday, September 27th, 4 p.m. Sproul Plaza. Also, please join the Vukani Mathwetu Choir for a special 12th anniversary party, Saturday, October the 3rd, 1998 at 6 p.m. at the Oasis on 12th Street in Oakland. And I'm going to remind you that in about 50 minutes, Underground Railroad is going to be presenting their evening cultural event. The Underground Railroad presents Reconstruction. That's from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. at local 2850 Union Hall, 548 20th Street. The address is in your book. What's not in your book is if you want to go on BART, take BART toward downtown Oakland, get off at 19th Street, walk 1 block up to 20th Street. You're there to party till 2 a.m. Good night. And you are the Hammer.